You have to understand is that testosterone does not by default make you a masculine man. It facilitates you becoming that man, but it will not do that work for you. How does testosterone impact how you feel, and how are those mechanisms occurring in the brain? Do you want high serum testosterone levels? Or do you want to be the man who was built on high testosterone levels? So what you have to understand is that testosterone does not by default make you a masculine man. It facilitates you becoming that man, but it will not do that work for you. And in the recent years since recording this lecture originally, I have worked with thousands of men, either one-on-one or through my clinics. And I can assure you without any shadow of a doubt that if you simply take testosterone injections or use a cream and simply increase your testosterone levels, it will not automatically reprogram your psychology, your biology, and all the aspects around who you are as a person to be that of a more masculine man. What this will do is it will give you the foundation to develop these traits and attributes and behaviors, but it will not do that for you. So it kind of builds the foundation of the house that has previously been falling down because that foundation was faulty, but you still have to be the one to engage in these behaviors and habits and routines, which I cover in the later lectures, to ultimately become the man that you are hoping to be and to embody and possess these traits and values that you likely look up to or aspire to have in strong male masculine role models. 57% of men are overweight, 41% of men are obese in Western countries. This is concerning. 8% of men in Western countries are on some form of psychiatric medication. I think that number is significantly higher these days. 75 to 80% of suicides are committed by men. 1 in 3 adults have reported periods of extreme chronic stress, 44% for adults over 55. 20% of men will experience periods of diagnosable anxiety. 12.5% will experience a diagnosable major depressive disorder. Between 1999 and 2016, testosterone levels have plummeted. And I can assure you that that downward trajectory has stayed consistent, if not continued further, since 2016. A study comparing men ages 18 to 30 and 55 plus, studied in 2011, did not show significantly different testosterone levels between the two age groups. Sperm counts have dropped by 50% since 1973 and 2011. Almost half of first marriages end in divorce, with climbing rates for each subsequent marriage. Almost 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Suicide increased by 4% between 2020 and 2021 alone. And when we look back on what happened in 2020 and 2021, I think there was a pretty probable cause for what one of those contributing variables was. Testosterone facilitates and modulates the production and synthesis of dopamine, but it does not create it on its own. So one way to look at this is that testosterone will not get you off the couch and into the gym. I wish it did, but it doesn't. But it will give you the results if you do deserve it from the work that you do. So humans are reward-driven creatures. So if you are hypogonadal and you are following the fitness program and you are following the nutrition routine and you're avoiding drinking alcohol and you're going to bed and getting 8 hours of sleep, but you're not actually progressing in your training and body composition, even though you should be based on applying progressive overload and nutrition principles, you're not going to be conditioned to engage in this behavior when the juice is not worth the squeeze. When you're not getting the result and when the inputs and outputs are not matching, this is not a process which drives repeat behavior, because humans are driven by incentives, both positive and negative conditioning. So when it comes to testosterone, testosterone is not a dopamine agonist. What testosterone does is it facilitates the production and synthesis of dopamine via modulating receptors, meaning bringing them, it's kind of like if you have a volume knob and 5 was the perfect volume and 0 is too much and 0 is too little, 10 is too much. It brings things along with other things. It's not the only thing in your body that modulates dopamine, but it modulates the receptor to work properly, and it also supports the conversion of the amino acid precursor pathways to create dopamine. What it is going to do, it is going to allow your brain to produce the right amount of dopamine, assuming all the other systems which support this are also in balance, which is why sleep and nutrition and stress and avoiding toxins is also very important, particularly alcohol. But what this is going to do is create a neurotransmitter environment that creates the right amount of dopamine in response to when dopamine should be created, because dopamine production is a demand-driven process, meaning that dopamine is not just elevated at baseline, again, unless you use stimulants. It is secreted based on things that are purposeful driven activities, overcoming adversity or challenge, pride, exercise, and it's very important to facilitate the building blocks with bioavailable vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, and combining this with these activities that increase the production. Derek from More Plates, More Dates and Andrew Huberman have often said since recording this lecture, which I think is a great quote, is that dopamine is the thing that makes effort feel good. And I think that that is a very important take-home point. So the next thing I want to talk about here is DHT. DHT is dihydrotestosterone. And some people, for some reason, believe that DHT is a redundant and inert hormone after puberty. This is asinine. If you look at DHT and its metabolites, it has very important, unique neurosteroidal properties, meaning that it is facilitating the way that the brain works. It is neuroprotective, and DHT is the primary driver of what's called the androgenic functions of testosterone. Androgenic means masculinizing. So if you're wanting to improve your outlook, if you're wanting to improve your capacity for leadership, if you're wanting to improve your resiliency to stress, DHT is not something that you want to avoid or block. When it comes to blocking and reducing DHT, you're not just reducing your capacity and potentially increasing your risk of permanent side effects or what hasn't been looked at yet, which I am concerned about, which is early onset dementia from a lack of the protection of DHT. But you also need to understand that the male physical attraction cues come from a lot more than how your haircut looks. So, bit of a side tangent. But DHT, and specifically its two metabolites, modulate the production and synthesis of norepinephrine and GABA. So when we look at norepinephrine and GABA, these are kind of yin and yang. Yin meaning calming and yang being fire or stimulating in this analogy. So norepinephrine, being the yang, creates focus and drive, while GABA promotes a calm, relaxed flow state. One of the challenges when we look at low testosterone men transitioning into becoming better versions of themselves with testosterone replacement therapy is they often have these maladaptive coping mechanisms because they've gone through either their formative years or recent years or even, unfortunately, decades with this low resiliency to stress, meaning that doing stuff that's hard, that incrementally pushes outside the bubble of the comfort zone, kind of like progressive overload, but pushing yourself to be comfortable, becoming more uncomfortable over time, this process doesn't really work because the dopamine response to the effort is low, but then the sensitivity to the cortisol and adrenaline is elevated. So what this means is that behaviorally, people become avoidant because they want to feel safe. They want to find easier ways to get their dopamine. So instead of going and doing martial arts or doing some kind of combat or intense related stressful activity, they choose violent video games, or instead of going on dates or approaching women or having relationships, they go for pornography. All of these things are safer, less vulnerable ways to get that dopamine release. And one of the problems with this is where this impacts your trajectory of where you end up. Because when you're a young man, 18 to 30, this is when you should be risk-taking, healthy risks, taking on the world, working on yourself, trying to leave your mark and becoming someone who is going to master an area of life and leave a legacy. But if the hormone levels are that of an 80-year-old at 18 years old, it means that you're not going to be driven to do these behaviors which will define you and grow your character and develop resiliency and confidence and bravery and resiliency to stress. And then where you end up at 30 or 40 years old as the outcome of that can lead to depressing circumstances. It can lead to low self-esteem, leads to low confidence, because the lack of competence, as Jordan Peterson says, creates a lack of confidence. And I think that this is a very sad and overlooked aspect of the endocrine disruption being experienced by younger men. And I think that this is a very important underlying factor for men not achieving healthy mental fortitude, resilience, and a psychological state, because even if their testosterone levels are not necessarily hypogonadal, they're not optimal. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below. So, stressful situations with low testosterone are overwhelming. They're harder than they are rewarding. The brain is promoting the production of beta brainwaves. So these are chaotic, broken thoughts, kind of like the monkey mind. Difficult to recover from exercise, default to avoidant behaviors, and there's a lack of positive reinforcement. So I'd like to present a case study, which is this idea of sexual performance anxiety in young men. And this is something that comes up all the time, is that, and I'm going to take you through the points that I've written here, and then I'm going to discuss it a little bit. So there's a yin and yang relationship with lust, desire, attraction, as well as vulnerability, nervousness, and the fear of the unknown when it comes to intimacy. So without adequate testosterone, there is not a buffer for the latter, causing an unregulated cascade of stress hormones resulting in a fight or flight response. So what this means is that intimacy, especially when it's the first time with a partner who ideally you've gotten to know and you care about, and there's a trusting relationship there, the process of engaging in intimacy for the first time, especially if it's a younger man who's less experienced with this is supposed to be something that is vulnerable. This is nervousness inducing. This is normal. This is healthy. But there is also supposed to be this overarching drive and lust and attraction which stifles this stress and fear response, meaning that you may still feel nervous. You may still feel vulnerable. You may still maybe feel a bit insecure about how well you can perform and all these different things, and you don't want to screw it up because you really like her and she's really pretty and blah, 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 blah. But there is supposed to be this stronger urge of raw physical attraction and desire which overcomes this. But when this is missing, this stress response becomes completely unregulated. And as a result, the stress response being unbuffered draws blood away from the extremities, and there is a very strong psychological fight or flight response, which creates this psychosomatic cascade of events in the body where the body draws blood closer to the vital organs to protect it and keep it alive, and the penis is technically an extremity, meaning that the erection process will be inhibited due to stress. This is not good for intimacy. The problem is that this then creates this self-fulfilling prophecy where all the signals and the context and the anticipation of intimacy now creates this association rather than with excitement. It creates the association with these feelings and failure and embarrassment and insecurity and fear. These are the stereotypes of what we think of, whether it's in Hollywood or, maybe not anymore, but, in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, of an 18 to 25-year-old man. Hypersexual, so very high sex drive, strong libido, obsessed. High metabolism, being able to eat anything and keep abs and just being an eating machine. High energy, risk-taking, athletic, aggressive, in their prime. This is how we used to think of men at this age. The reality, and this goes tenfold from what I said 3 years ago. The reality of most 18 to 25-year-old men: low libido, erectile dysfunction, overweight, lazy, avoidant, anxiety and depression, despondent, passive, submissive, low motivation, and hedonic. This is the reality of how most younger men are doing, and it is a stark contrast to what the stereotypical average guy was doing, what he was thinking, how he was performing even a few decades ago. So taking an injection of testosterone does not hit some kind of miraculous panacea miracle reset button. Wish it did. My job would be way easier. You wouldn't even need to watch the video. But a lot of the time people are watching these videos because their expectations weren't met. So it doesn't hit this reset button on a man's character, his values, his identity, his inner monologue, his career, his relationship, or his past. It doesn't do that. Wish it did. It doesn't. All it does is it corrects the foundation that was not there previously, but the work still has to be done. And this is where I know from experience working with so many guys that this is so challenging. If you've been to the gym and done the fitness routine and done everything right 10 times and it's never worked, you've never got the result, it takes a hell of a lot of courage and a hell of a lot of balls, which is ironic given that testosterone causes testicular atrophy. But it takes a hell of a lot of metaphorical balls to go back and do that shit again for the 11th time. And that's where I think this information is really valuable, because if people can intrinsically understand why it didn't work before, and it's not because they were victims, but it's because the biological circumstances weren't there. It wasn't a failure from a lack of trying. It was a problem with the machine being broken. But fixing that machine doesn't mean that it's automatically going to now get those results for you without doing that work. You have to go back and do that work again, but now trusting in the process that what should have worked before will work now. But you will only get the results that you deserve. Nothing less, which is great, but also nothing more. So, and this is an analogy that I've beat to death since 2022, but I'm going to come back to it. Repairing the foundation does not rebuild the house. It only gives you the opportunity to rebuild the house. Buying a sports car does not make you a better driver, but it gives you the potential and tools to become a better driver. And that's what TRT is doing. So I have 5 lessons here that I want to teach regarding this concept of the war on masculinity. And when it comes to this societal phenomenon of the war on masculinity, it is very clear that masculinity is being stigmatized, it is being suppressed, it is being demonized, and it is made to, I guess, be perceived and considered as a negative character trait. This is ridiculous. And one of the things I said in my Silverback lecture from last year is that toxic masculinity doesn't exist. Some men are just dicks. But they're not dicks because they're men. They're dicks and they're men. So masculinity is only positive. Anything that people are saying that is toxic masculinity may be things that men do, but it has nothing. You have to understand is that testosterone does not by default make you a masculine man. It facilitates you becoming that man, but it will not do that work for you. How does testosterone impact how you feel, and how are those mechanisms occurring?